My name is Stuart, 34 years old, and I've always been the invisible middle child. I left home at 18 and built a successful career in finance while secretly paying my parents' $8,000 mortgage every month for 8 years. They never knew. Despite my financial success, I remained the family outcast. Last Thanksgiving, as we gathered around the dinner table, my brother Marcus dropped a bomb. Mom and Dad said, "You never contribute anything to this family." Everyone nodded and applauded. I smiled calmly and said, "Perfect." Then the $8,000 I've been paying for their mortgage every month stops today. Dad choked on his drink and Mom turned pale. Before I continue with this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt underappreciated by the people who should value you most. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Boston, I always felt like I was living in the shadows. Our family dynamics were clear from early on. Marcus, my older brother by 2 years, was the athletic star who brought home trophies and commanded attention with his charismatic personality. Elaine, my younger sister by 4 years, was the academic prodigy who skipped grades and made our parents beam with pride at every honor roll ceremony. And then there was me, Stuart, the middle child, who was neither exceptionally athletic nor an academic genius. Our house was modest but comfortable, a colonial-style home with 4 bedrooms in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other. Dad worked as a high school history teacher, while Mom ran a small bakery downtown. They weren't wealthy, but they managed to provide a stable life for us. At least that's how it seemed on the surface. From as early as I can remember, I noticed the subtle differences in how we were treated. When Marcus needed new baseball equipment, money was always found despite budget concerns. When Elaine needed special tutoring for advanced placement classes, sacrifices were made without question. But when I showed interest in attending a finance camp during summer break in 8th grade, I was told we couldn't afford extras like that and that I should find free activities instead. I discovered my passion for numbers and finance when I was 12. Our math teacher, Mr. Wilson, assigned us a project about the stock market. While other kids groaned, something clicked for me. I created elaborate spreadsheets tracking fictional investments, calculating compound interest, and predicting market trends based on news events. My teacher was impressed enough to give me an A+, but when I showed my parents, Dad glanced at it briefly and said, "That's nice, Stuart," before turning back to watch Marcus pitch in his high school baseball game on the living room TV. By high school, I had accepted my place in the family hierarchy. I stopped seeking approval and focused on building my own path. While Marcus received a car for his 16th birthday, I took the bus to my part-time job at the local bank where I worked as a teller after school. No one suggested I should get a car, too. It was just understood that Marcus needed one for baseball practice, and Elaine would eventually need one for her science competitions. My grades were good, not spectacular like Elaine's, but solid enough to get into decent colleges. I applied to business programs focusing on finance, despite my father pushing me to follow Marcus into pre-law. The family could use another lawyer, he'd say, ignoring my clear interest and aptitude in financial matters. When college acceptance letters arrived, I received an offer from a good state university with a strong business program. Marcus had attended an Ivy League school on a partial athletic scholarship, with our parents covering the considerable remainder. Elaine would later attend another prestigious university on a merit scholarship. For me, the conversation was brief. "We can help a little, but you'll need to take out loans and work through school," Mom explained, not unkindly but matter-of-factly. I didn't complain. Instead, I worked 30 hours a week while carrying a full course load. I was a teaching assistant for introductory finance classes, worked weekends at a local bank branch, and took extra online courses during summers to graduate on time. My college experience wasn't about parties or campus activities. It was about survival and building towards something better. When graduation day came, I sat among my peers in my cap and gown, scanning the audience for familiar faces. My family had sent regrets. Marcus had a law school event, Elaine had a science competition, and my parents couldn't leave the bakery unattended. I told myself it didn't matter. My finance professor, Dr. Harrington, who had become a mentor, clapped extra loud when they called my name. After college, I received 2 job offers. One was in Boston, close to home, with a smaller firm. The other was in Chicago with a prestigious financial services company that offered twice the salary and a clear advancement path. When I called home to discuss it, Dad said, "Do what you want, Stuart. You always have." There was no discussion about how this was a major opportunity or how proud they were. It was just accepted that I would go my own way as I always had. So at 22, I moved to Chicago with 2 suitcases and a box of finance textbooks. No one came to help me move. No tearful goodbye party was thrown. I simply left, promising to call when I got settled. My new apartment was tiny, but in a decent neighborhood close to public transportation. I lived frugally, investing a portion of each paycheck and paying down my student loans aggressively. For the first few years, I called home weekly. The conversations were brief and followed a pattern: updates on Marcus's law school success, Elaine's academic achievements, neighborhood gossip, and maybe, if time permitted, a quick "how are you doing" directed at me. I'd share about promotions or successful investment strategies I'd developed, but the responses were usually polite acknowledgments rather than genuine interest. It was during one of these calls, about 5 years after I'd moved away, that I first got a hint. Something might be wrong at home. Mom mentioned casually that they were tightening their belts and had put off some house repairs. I offered to help, but they quickly refused, changing the subject to Marcus passing the bar exam. The real revelation came a few months later. Mrs. Johnson, our longtime neighbor, found me on Facebook and sent a message. She had known me since I was a child and had always been kind to me. Her message was concerning. "Stuart, dear, I hope this isn't overstepping, but I'm worried about your parents. I've seen notices on their door that look like mortgage warnings. They seem stressed but won't talk about it. I thought you should know." I sat staring at that message for a long time, my mind racing. My parents had owned their home for over 25 years. How could they be having mortgage problems? But as I thought about it, signs began to align. The economic recession had hit many small businesses hard, including Mom's bakery. Dad was approaching retirement age without a substantial pension, and I knew they had helped finance Marcus's expensive law school and contributed to Elaine's wedding the previous year. That night I couldn't sleep. Despite feeling overlooked by my family for years, I couldn't bear the thought of them losing their home, the place where, despite everything, I had grown up. The next morning I called in sick to work for the first time in my career. I had research to do and calls to make. After receiving that message from Mrs. Johnson about my parents' potential mortgage crisis, I began discreetly investigating. I didn't want to embarrass them by asking directly, knowing their pride would prevent honest answers. Instead, I called a college friend who worked in real estate in Boston and asked for general information about property records in my parents' neighborhood. What I discovered shocked me. My parents had refinanced their home during the housing bubble, taking out a substantial equity line to help with Marcus's law school expenses and to update Mom's bakery equipment. When the recession hit, property values plummeted and they found themselves underwater on the mortgage. The bakery's declining revenue made the new higher payments difficult to maintain. They had already missed 2 payments and were on the brink of foreclosure proceedings. I needed professional advice, so I scheduled a meeting with Harold Greenfield, my financial advisor in Chicago. Harold was a grandfatherly man in his 60s who had guided my investments since my first year in the city. His office, with its leather chairs and wall of finance books, always made me feel like I was making smart decisions. "Stuart," Harold said, after I explained the situation, "your impulse to help your parents is admirable, but I need to ask a difficult question. Given what you've told me about your family dynamics, why take on this financial burden?" I stared out his office window at the Chicago skyline before answering, because, despite everything, they're my family. And that house, it's not just theirs. It holds my childhood, too. I can't let it go without trying to help. Harold nodded thoughtfully. "There are several ways you could approach this. You could offer them a direct loan with favorable terms. You could buy the house and let them live there, or you could make their mortgage payments without their knowledge. Each option had implications. A direct loan would require uncomfortable conversations and might create a dynamic where they felt indebted to me, something I knew would strain our already tenuous relationship. Buying the house outright would give me control but might feel like a power play. Making the payments secretly would help them while preserving their dignity and our current relationship such as it was. "I think I want to make the payments without them knowing," I finally said. "At least for now." Harold raised an eyebrow. "That's generous, Stuart, but it means taking on a significant financial commitment with no recognition or thanks, and it could enable their financial mismanagement rather than addressing underlying issues." His words were wise, but my mind was made up. I understand the risks, but this feels right to me. Setting up the arrangement took some finesse. I contacted Michael Forrester, a mortgage broker, who specialized in unusual situations. After explaining my plan, he helped me establish a system where I could make direct payments to the mortgage company without my parents being notified of the source. I would cover the $8,000 monthly payment, which included the principal, interest, insurance, and property taxes. To afford this, I needed to make significant changes to my lifestyle. I moved from my comfortable one-bedroom apartment to a studio half the size in a less desirable neighborhood. I sold my car and started taking public transportation. Vacations became staycations. Restaurant meals became home cooking. I took on consulting side gigs that often kept me working until midnight after my regular job. My boss, Mr. Peterson, noticed the changes in my lifestyle and the bags under my eyes. During a performance review, he questioned me directly. "Stuart, your work is excellent as always, but you seem stretched thin. Is everything all right?" I considered lying, but opted for a partial truth. "Family, financial obligations, sir. Nothing that will impact my performance." He studied me with concern. "We value your contributions here, Stuart. Don't burn yourself out. Let me know if there's anything the company can do to help." His words struck me as ironic. My workplace valued my contributions more explicitly than my own family ever had. The one person who knew the full truth was my best friend Ryan. We had met at a financial technology conference my first year in Chicago and bonded over our shared interest in behavioral economics. Ryan was blunt to a fault and fiercely loyal. When I told him about my plan to secretly pay my parents' mortgage, he didn't hold back. "This is the dumbest smart guy move I've ever heard. You're enabling their behavior and martyring yourself for people who don't even see you." We were sitting in his apartment watching a basketball game with the sound muted as we talked. I took a sip of beer before responding. "Maybe, but I'm not doing it for their validation anymore. I'm doing it because it's what I want to do." Ryan shook his head. "And what happens when they find out? Because secrets like this don't stay buried forever." "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I'll cross that bridge when I come to it." As the months turned into years, the mortgage payments became just another bill in my budget. I set up automatic transfers, and the money left my account like clockwork on the first of every month. $8,000, nearly half my monthly income, at the beginning silently protecting my parents from homelessness without their knowledge. During those years, my communications with my family remained largely unchanged. I called home monthly, visited for major holidays, and sent appropriate gifts for birthdays and anniversaries. No one asked how I could afford the gifts on what they assumed was a modest salary, just as no one questioned how my parents had magically recovered from their financial difficulties. There were casualties to my decision. My relationship with Natalie, a brilliant architect I dated for 2 years, ended partly because of the financial strain and partly because of the emotional distance created by my secret. "I feel like you're never fully present," she said during our breakup conversation, "like there's a part of yourself you keep locked away even from me." She was right, of course. I hadn't told her about the mortgage payments either. It wasn't just about keeping my parents' financial troubles private. It was also about protecting myself from judgment over what even I recognized might be an unhealthy dynamic. 4 years into my secret arrangement, Ryan confronted me again. We were celebrating my promotion to senior financial advisor, a position that finally gave me some breathing room in my budget. "So now that you're making serious money, are you going to stop bankrolling your parents and start living your life?" he asked. I swirled the whiskey in my glass. "It's not that simple. If I stop now, they'll lose the house. The mortgage still has 11 years left." Ryan leaned forward. "Stuart, listen to yourself. You're sacrificing your prime years for people who have made it clear they value Marcus and Elaine more than you. What are you trying to prove?" His question hit home harder than I wanted to admit. What was I trying to prove? That I was worthy, that I was successful despite their lack of support, or was I still that middle child desperately seeking approval that never came? "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said finally. Maybe at first I was, but now it's just what I do. It's a commitment I made. Ryan's expression softened. "Just promise me something. Promise you won't do this forever without ever standing up for yourself. There's helping family, and then there's being a doormat. Know the difference." I promised him I would, though I wasn't sure what that line looked like or when I would reach it. I just knew I wasn't there yet. Despite Ryan's concerns, there were moments when I felt my secret contribution was worth it. Like when Dad called to share that Mom's bakery had survived the recession while many local businesses had closed. Or when I visited home and saw my childhood bedroom preserved just as I'd left it, there was comfort in knowing that while I might not be the favorite child, I was at least protecting something that mattered to all of us. But as another Thanksgiving approached the 8th year of my secret payments, I had no idea that the carefully constructed balance I had maintained was about to spectacularly collapse. The email arrived on a crisp October morning annual Thanksgiving invitation. The whole family together again. Mom always sent formal invitations, despite the fact that Thanksgiving at my parents' house was an unchanging tradition. The email included the usual details: dinner at 4 o'clock, bring a dessert or wine, let her know if I was bringing a guest. I stared at it longer than necessary, my finger hovering over the reply button. This year felt different somehow. Maybe it was because I had recently been promoted again, this time to Vice President of Investment Strategy. Maybe it was because I was approaching 35 with no significant relationship, no children, and a mounting sense that my life was passing by while I subsidized everyone else's dreams. I forwarded the invitation to Ryan with a simple question: should I go this year? His reply came minutes later. You'll go. You always go. But maybe this is the year you finally tell them the truth. Ryan was right. I would go. Despite everything, there was a part of me that still hoped each family gathering might be different, that my parents might finally see me, that Marcus might treat me as an equal, that Elaine might acknowledge my existence beyond a perfunctory hug. I responded to Mom's invitation with a brief, "I'll be there," bringing wine. No guest. It had been the same response for 8 years. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were busy with work and preparations. I selected an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon from a small vineyard in Napa, a $300 to $100 bottle that I knew my father would appreciate but never think to ask how I could afford. I purchased thoughtful gifts for everyone. A rare first-edition history book for Dad, artisanal baking tools for Mom, monogrammed cufflinks for Marcus, and a handcrafted scarf for Elaine. For Marcus's wife, Jessica, and Elaine's husband, Greg, I chose gift certificates to high-end restaurants in Boston. The drive from Chicago to Boston took 12 hours. I could have flown, but I preferred the solitude of the road, the time to prepare mentally for family interactions that inevitably left me feeling diminished. The highways stretched before me as I crossed from Illinois, through Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, and finally into Massachusetts. With each state line, I felt the weight of expectations growing heavier. I rehearsed conversations in my head. I imagined responding differently to the predictable slights, standing up for myself instead of maintaining the peace. But I knew that when the moment came, I would likely fall back into old patterns. The family peacekeeper, the invisible middle child, the one who never rocked the boat. I arrived in Boston the day before Thanksgiving and checked into a hotel rather than staying at my parents' house. I claimed it was because I needed to take work calls early in the morning, but the truth was I needed the emotional buffer space. That evening I drove past our family home, slowing down to look at it in the fading light. They had repainted it recently, a soft blue-gray that replaced the faded yellow I remembered from childhood. The landscaping had been updated with stone pathways and decorative shrubs, renovations I had indirectly funded through my monthly payments. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold. I slept later than intended, ordered room service breakfast, and spent an hour answering emails before finally preparing to face my family. I dressed carefully in a casual but expensive outfit: dark jeans, a light blue button-down shirt, and a charcoal blazer. Professional but not stuffy, successful but not showy. I arrived at my parents' house at 3:30, precisely 30 minutes before the invited time. Mom always appreciated early arrivers who could help with last-minute preparations. She opened the door before I could knock, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed genuine. "Stuart, you're early, thank goodness. Your father is struggling with the wine opener, and I need someone to arrange the cheese plate." She hugged me quickly before pulling me inside. The house smelled of roasting turkey and cinnamon. Dad emerged from the kitchen, wine opener in hand and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "There's my boy," he said, warmly patting my shoulder as he passed the wine opener to me. Show us how it's done, Mr. Financial Wizard. I smiled at the rare acknowledgement of my career. Good to see you too, Dad. As I opened wine bottles and arranged the elaborate cheese board Mom had prepared, I took in the subtle changes to the house. New hardwood flooring had replaced the old carpet in the living room. The kitchen had been remodeled with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The dining room featured a new table that could comfortably seat 10 people. All improvements that would have been impossible without the mortgage payments I had been making. The doorbell rang at 4 o'clock sharp, and Dad went to answer it. Marcus's booming voice filled the entryway, followed by the lighter tones of his wife, Jessica. I steeled myself and went to greet them. Marcus looked exactly as he always did, confident, polished, and slightly intimidating in his casual perfection. His law career had treated him well evident in his designer clothes and the luxury watch gleaming on his wrist. Jessica was elegantly dressed in a simple black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Little brother Marcus exclaimed, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to make me step back. Still hiding out in Chicago, when are you going to move back to civilization? Before I could answer, he turned to our parents. Mom, the house looks amazing. Dad, that lawn is pristine. You two are really living the dream these days. I bit my tongue, knowing that their dream was courtesy of my monthly payments. Jessica offered me a polite hug and whispered, "He's been stressed about a big case. Don't mind him." Elaine and Greg arrived 15 minutes later with their twin 5-year-old daughters in tow. More hugs were exchanged. More compliments about the house were given. The conversation flowed around me as I quietly helped Mom bring dishes to the table and made sure everyone's wine glass stayed filled. As we settled into the living room before dinner, I overheard Dad and Marcus talking in the hallway, their voices slightly lowered but not enough. "Marcus, that's Stuart. I worry about him," Dad said. 34, and still just working for someone else. No family of his own. Never really amounted to much, has he? "He seems content enough," Marcus replied. "Some people just don't have ambition. Not everyone can build a successful law practice or raise a family." I froze, wine bottle in hand, as their words washed over me. After all these years, after all I had sacrificed for them, this was still how they saw me. The underachiever. The disappointment. I considered confronting them right then, but was interrupted by Mom calling everyone to the dining room. The seating arrangement at the table spoke volumes. Dad at the head, Mom at the foot. Marcus and Jessica to Dad's right, the position of honor. Elaine and Greg to his left. The twins were given booster seats next to their parents. I was placed at the far end next to Mom, beside an empty chair that emphasized my lack of a partner. Dad said the Thanksgiving prayer, a tradition in our family. "Lord, we thank you for this abundant feast and for bringing our family together once again. We're grateful for Marcus's continued success with his law firm and for the wonderful new cases he's winning. We're thankful for Elaine's dedication to her children and her community volunteer work. We're blessed by Greg's promotion and Jessica's new interior design business. We're grateful that Linda and I can host everyone in our beautiful home that we've worked so hard to maintain. Amen." No mention of me or anything in my life. Not my promotion, not my contributions, not even my presence at the table. It was as if I were invisible, a ghost at my own family gathering. Dinner began with the passing of dishes and polite conversation. The focus remained primarily on Marcus and Elaine, their accomplishments, their children, their contributions to the family legacy. I ate quietly, nodding at appropriate intervals and refilling wine glasses when they emptied. Then Marcus, perhaps emboldened by his third glass of the expensive wine I had brought, turned his attention to me. "So, Stuart," he said loudly enough to capture everyone's attention, "I heard you finally got a promotion. Vice president or something, right? Took you long enough." The table fell quiet as all eyes turned to me. I nodded and took a sip of wine before responding. "Yes, Vice President of Investment Strategy. It's a good position." Marcus seemed disappointed by my understated response. He pressed further. "So what exactly does a vice president do at your company? Push papers and attend meetings?" I maintained my composure. "I oversee investment portfolios worth several $billion and develop strategies to maximize returns while managing risk." "Several billion," Dad interjected, his eyebrows raised. "That sounds impressive, but what does it mean for you personally, Marcus? Just bought a summer house on Cape Cod." And there it was, the immediate pivot to Marcus's accomplishments, the implicit comparison that always left me on the losing end. I'm doing well, I said simply. My career is on track. On track for what? Marcus asked, with a slight smirk. You live in a rented apartment, right? No real estate investments, no family. What exactly are you building out there in Chicago? Jessica placed a hand on his arm. Marcus, I'm sure Stuart is doing fine. I'm just saying, Marcus continued, shrugging off her touch at his age. I had already made partner bought our first house, and we were expecting our first child. It's about building a legacy. Mom attempted to change the subject. The turkey is especially juicy this year. Don't you think I tried a new brining technique? But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned to our parents. Remember how you helped us with the down payment on our first house? That was such a blessing. We couldn't have done it without your support. Dad nodded proudly. Family helps family. That's what we do. And we've paid it back tenfold, Marcus added. The renovations we helped fund for the kitchen, the vacation we sent you on for your anniversary, the new car we helped with last year. Elaine joined in. And we've been handling all the yard work and maintenance since Dad's back started acting up. Greg spent 3 weekends redoing the deck last summer. I looked around the table, noticing how everyone was nodding in agreement, congratulating themselves on their contributions, while completely ignoring that I had literally kept the roof over their heads for years. We're so blessed to have such thoughtful children, Mom said, beaming at Marcus and Elaine. Well, most of us anyway, Marcus said, his gaze sliding pointedly to me. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I set my fork down slowly. What exactly does that mean? I asked quietly. Marcus took another swig of wine. Come on, Stuart. You know what I mean. You've always been independent, off doing your own thing in Chicago. Which is fine, but the rest of us have been here supporting Mom and Dad, helping them keep this beautiful house, taking care of family matters. I contribute in my own way, I said carefully. Like how Marcus challenged. When was the last time you helped with anything around here? You send birthday gifts and show up for holidays with expensive wine, but that's not real support. I noticed my parents exchanging uncomfortable glances but saying nothing to defend me. I don't think this is an appropriate dinner conversation, I tried, but Marcus was on a roll now. No, let's talk about it. Mom and Dad are too polite to say anything, but I'm not. They've mentioned it to me more than once. Mentioned what I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. Marcus looked directly at me, his expression a mixture of condescension and righteousness. That you never contribute anything to this family. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I looked around the table. Elaine was studying her plate. Greg appeared uncomfortable but said nothing. Jessica was shooting Marcus warning glances. But most telling were my parents, who sat in silence, their lack of objection confirming that Marcus was indeed speaking their thoughts. Then Marcus continued. You left home at 18 and never looked back. While I was helping put Elaine through college and supporting Mom's bakery during the recession, you were building your precious career in Chicago. When Dad needed back surgery, where were you? When Mom's bakery almost went under, did you offer to help? No, you sent a fruit basket. To my horror, several heads nodded around the table. Even Elaine joined in. It's true, Stuart. When I needed emergency childcare last year because both kids had flu, Mom mentioned calling you for help, and I told her not to bother. We all knew you wouldn't come. That's not fair, I started to say, but Marcus interrupted. It is fair. It's the truth. You've always been the taker in this family, never the giver. And then, as if to twist the knife deeper, Marcus looked around the table and said, Who here disagrees with me? Who thinks Stuart has been a contributing member of this family? Silence fell. No one spoke up. No one defended me. And then, to my utter disbelief, Marcus's statement was met with subtle nods of agreement around the table. And then came the final blow, a smattering of applause started by Marcus, joined by Greg, and even painfully by my father. Something broke inside me at that moment. 8 years of monthly payments, 8 years of sacrificed opportunities, 8 years of believing that someday they would see my worth, all shattered by applause, approving the statement that I had contributed nothing. I felt a strange calm wash over me. This was it, the line Ryan had talked about. The moment when helping family crossed into being a doormat. I took a slow sip of my wine, set the glass down carefully, and smiled. Perfect, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Then the $8,000 I've been paying for your mortgage every month stops today. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Dad, who had been taking a drink of water, choked and began coughing violently. Mom's face drained of all color, her complexion turning the shade of the white tablecloth. Marcus froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. "What did you just say?" he finally managed. "You heard me," I replied, still maintaining that unnatural calm. "For the past 8 years I've been making your mortgage payments. $8,000 every month directly to the bank. That's why you didn't lose this house during the recession. That's why you can afford all these nice renovations. That's how you've managed to keep this beautiful home that Dad just prayed about." "That's not possible," Dad said, finding his voice. "We would know if someone else was making our payments." I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and slid it across the table. "Check the recurring transfers yourself. First of each month, $8,000 to Homestead Mortgage Services. That's your mortgage company, isn't it?" Mom's hands were trembling. "Stuart, I don't understand." "It's simple, Mom. 8 years ago, Mrs. Johnson told me you were about to lose the house because you refinanced to help Marcus through law school, and then the recession hit. I contacted your mortgage company and arranged to make the payments without your knowledge. I've been doing it ever since." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me in disbelief, his earlier smugness replaced by confusion. "Why would you do that and not tell anyone?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Would it have made a difference? Would you have suddenly seen me as a contributing member of this family? Or would you have found a way to diminish it, like you've diminished everything else I've ever done?" $8,000 a month, Dad mumbled, doing the math in his head. That's $768,000 over 8 years I finished for him. Give or take depending on tax adjustments. Nearly half my income at the beginning. I lived in a studio apartment the size of your new guest bathroom to afford it. I sold my car. I worked 60-hour weeks and took side consulting jobs. I lost my relationship with Natalie because I was always working or too stressed about money. The magnitude of what I was saying seemed to be slowly sinking in around the table. Elaine's eyes had filled with tears. Greg was staring at his plate. Jessica was watching Marcus with an expression I couldn't interpret. "But why keep it a secret?" Mom asked, her voice small. I looked at her directly, because I wanted to be valued for who I am, not for my money. I wanted to know that I mattered to this family beyond what I could provide financially. Today, I got my answer. I stood up from the table. "So yes, Marcus is right. Starting today, I will no longer be contributing to this family, at least not financially. The mortgage payment due next week will be the last one I make. You have about 30 days to figure out how you're going to come up with $8,000 a month going forward." The dining room erupted into chaos. Multiple voices spoke at once, creating a cacophony of shock, denial, and panic. "This is ridiculous," Marcus shouted, standing up so quickly his chair nearly toppled backward. "You're making this up to make yourself look important." "Stuart, please," Mom pleaded, tears forming in her eyes. "There must be some misunderstanding." Dad sat frozen, his face, a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. I remained standing oddly calm in the center of the storm I had created. "There's no misunderstanding. I can show you all the payments, the arrangement with the mortgage company, everything." I pulled out my phone again and opened my financial records app. With a few taps, I brought up the history of transactions, 96 payments of $8,000 each, stretching back 8 years. I passed the phone to my father. "Look at the account numbers. Call the mortgage company if you don't believe me. Ask them who's been making your payments since November 2017. Dad stared at the screen, scrolling slowly through the transaction history. His hands trembled slightly. "My God," he whispered, "it's true." Marcus snatched the phone from Dad's hands and scrutinized the records, his expression darkening as the truth became undeniable. "Why would you do this in secret? What kind of person pays someone's mortgage without telling them?" "The kind who's tired of being invisible," I replied evenly. "The kind who thought maybe someday his family would see his worth without having to wave a bank statement in their faces." Jessica spoke up for the first time, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I think what Stuart did was incredibly generous. 8 years of payments is an extraordinary commitment." Marcus glared at her. "Don't take his side. He's trying to humiliate us to make himself look like the hero and the rest of us like ungrateful jerks." "You're doing a fine job of that yourself," Jessica muttered. Mom had buried her face in her hands. When she looked up, her expression was different, a mixture of guilt and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Stuart," she said quietly. "We need to tell you something." Dad shook his head sharply, but Mom continued. "We knew. Not at first, but we found out about 3 years ago." The room went silent again. I felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath me. "You knew?" I repeated, my voice hollow. Mom nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "The mortgage company sent a tax form to the house by mistake. It showed the payments were coming from your account. And you never said anything." I felt a new wave of hurt washing over me. "For 3 years, you let me keep paying without a word of acknowledgement or thanks." "We were embarrassed," Dad admitted, his voice strained. "We had always prided ourselves on being self-sufficient, on taking care of our children, not the other way around. And then to find out that our middle child, the one we had always thought was doing just fine without our help, was actually supporting us. It was humiliating." "So your pride was more important than honesty, more important than acknowledging what I was sacrificing for you." "We were going to tell you," Mom insisted. "We just couldn't find the right moment." "The right moment," I repeated incredulously. "How about, 'Thank you for the payment, Stuart'? Or, 'We noticed you're paying our mortgage, son', or literally any acknowledgement in the past 3 years. Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this revelation, found his voice again. This is classic Stuart, making a grand gesture in secret so he can hold it over everyone's heads later. "You're not being generous, you're trying to buy the family's approval." That accusation stung because there was a kernel of truth in it. Hadn't I hoped somewhere deep down that my financial support would eventually translate into the recognition and appreciation I'd always craved? Wasn't that partly why I'd kept the payments going even after promotions? Had made my financial situation more comfortable. But I wasn't going to let Marcus twist this into making me the villain. "Think whatever you want, Marcus. The fact remains that I've been keeping this family afloat while you've been taking credit for being the supportive son. Those kitchen renovations Mom thanked you for, my money paid for those. That anniversary vacation. Possible because they weren't worried about making mortgage payments." Elaine, who had been silently crying, finally spoke. "Stuart, I had no idea. I'm so sorry for what I said earlier." Her apology, the first genuine one of the evening, caught me off guard. I nodded in acknowledgement but wasn't ready to accept it fully. "I think I should go," I said, gathering my coat from the back of my chair. "You can't just drop this bomb and leave," Marcus protested. "We need to figure out what happens next." "What happens next is simple," I replied. "I've made the decision to stop the payments. You all have 30 days to figure out how to cover an $8,000 monthly mortgage payment." Dad stood up shakily. "Son, please. Let's discuss this rationally. We can work something out." "We've had 8 years to work something out, Dad. 8 years where you could have acknowledged what I was doing. Instead, I got to sit here tonight and listen to everyone applaud when Marcus said I contribute nothing to this family." I moved toward the door, but Marcus blocked my path, his face flushed with anger. "You can't do this to them. They're in their 60s. Where are they supposed to find that kind of money every month?" "The same place I did hard work and sacrifice. Or maybe their favorite son can step up and help. After all, you just bought a summer house on Cape Cod, right? Sounds like you can afford it." Marcus's expression darkened. "You selfish bastard. This isn't about the money. This is about you feeling underappreciated and throwing a tantrum." "Maybe you're right," I conceded. "Maybe I am finally standing up for myself after years of being overlooked and undervalued. Call it whatever you want, but my decision is made." I stepped around him toward the door. "Stuart, please," Mom called, her voice breaking. "Don't leave like this." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "I'll call you tomorrow when we've all had time to think, but I'm not changing my mind about the payments." With that, I walked out into the cold November air, closing the door firmly behind me. I made it to my car before the emotions hit me, a tidal wave of anger, hurt, vindication, and regret. My hands shook so badly I couldn't insert the key into the ignition. I sat there in the darkness, staring at the house where I'd grown up, the house I'd saved from foreclosure, the house where I'd just blown up my family relationships. Through the dining room window, I could see shadowy figures gesturing and moving. The confrontation was continuing without me. Eventually, I started the car and drove away, heading back to my hotel in a daze. Once in my room, I collapsed onto the bed, physically and emotionally drained. My phone began buzzing almost immediately, calls and texts from various family members. I silenced it and placed it face down on the nightstand. Around midnight, I finally picked up when Ryan called. "How'd it go?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew it hadn't gone well. I told them. I said simply, "Holy shit, you actually did it. What happened?" I gave him the condensed version, including the revelation that my parents had known for 3 years. Ryan was silent for a moment before responding. "I know this feels awful right now, but I'm proud of you, Stuart. You finally stood up for yourself." "I don't feel proud," I admitted. "I feel like I just blew up my entire family." "Maybe it needed blowing up," Ryan suggested gently. "Maybe this is the only way anything will ever change." As I lay awake that night staring at the hotel ceiling, I wondered if he was right. Had I done something necessary, or had I simply acted out of hurt pride? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that tomorrow I would have to face the consequences of my revelation, and nothing would ever be the same again. I woke up the next morning to 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 16 voicemails. Most were from my parents, with several from Elaine and even a few from Jessica, surprisingly. None from Marcus. I didn't listen to the voicemails or read the texts. Instead, I texted, "Mom can meet for coffee at 11 at Riverdale Cafe." Her response came immediately, "We'll be there." I arrived early and secured a corner table away from other patrons. The cafe was quiet the day after Thanksgiving, with most people either shopping or recovering from holiday excess. I ordered black coffee and waited, trying to prepare myself mentally for what was coming. My parents arrived precisely at 11, looking as if they hadn't slept. Mom's eyes were puffy from crying, and Dad seemed to have aged overnight. They ordered coffee and sat across from me, an uncomfortable silence settling over our table. Finally, Dad spoke. "Stuart, about last night." "I meant what I said," I interrupted, keeping my voice low and steady. "The payments will stop." "We understand," Mom said quickly, reaching across the table as if to take my hand but stopping when I didn't offer it. "And we don't blame you. What happened last night was inexcusable, the way we all treated you." I was surprised by her admission. "Then you acknowledged that what Marcus said was wrong." "Of course it was wrong," Dad said firmly. "You've contributed more than anyone in ways we never even knew. And even if you hadn't been making those payments, it would still be wrong. You're our son, and we love you regardless of financial support." His words should have comforted me, but they rang hollow after years of evidence to the contrary. "If that's true, why didn't you speak up when Marcus was attacking me? Why didn't you tell him that you knew I'd been making your mortgage payments for years?" They exchanged glances, and Mom sighed. We were shocked by the confrontation. Everything happened so quickly, and yes, we were wrong not to defend you. "And wrong not to tell you we knew about the payments," Dad added. "Our pride got in the way. We didn't want to admit we needed help, especially from you." "Especially from me," I repeated, "as opposed to Marcus or Elaine." Dad winced at his poor choice of words. "That's not what I meant. It's just, you were always so independent, so capable. You never seemed to need us, so it was hard to accept that we needed you." I took a sip of coffee, considering his words. "I didn't need you financially, Dad, but I needed you in other ways. I needed your approval, your interest in my life, your acknowledgement of my achievements. Do you have any idea how it feels to call home with news about a promotion and have the subject immediately changed to Marcus's latest case?" Mom's eyes filled with tears again. "We failed you, Stuart. We see that now, and we're truly sorry." Their apology seemed genuine, but I'd spent too many years being overlooked to accept it easily. I appreciate that, but apologies don't change the financial reality we're facing. The mortgage payment is due in 1 week. After that, you'll need to make other arrangements. "We understand," Dad said, straightening his shoulders. "We've spent most of the night discussing options. We can downsize, sell the house, and find something smaller within our budget." "Or refinance," Mom added. "The house has appreciated significantly. We could take out a 30-year mortgage at our age, which sounds absurd, but it would lower the payments to something manageable." I was impressed by their practical approach and said so. "Those are reasonable options. I'll give you 3 months of continued payments to arrange whatever solution works best for you. That should be enough time to either sell or refinance." Relief washed over their faces. "Thank you, Stuart," Dad said. "That's very generous, especially after everything that's happened." "It's not generosity," I clarified. "It's a reasonable transition period. I'm not trying to put you out on the street or force a fire sale of your home. I just can't continue subsidizing the family indefinitely while being treated as if I contribute nothing." "We understand completely," Mom assured me. And whatever we decide, we want you to be part of the process. No more secrets between us." We talked for another hour, the conversation gradually becoming easier as we discussed practical matters rather than emotional ones. They shared details of their finances that they had never revealed before: Dad's modest teacher's pension, Mom's Social Security, the bakery's revenue now that it was under new management but still partially owned by Mom. I offered advice on investment options and budgeting strategies. As we were preparing to leave, Mom asked hesitantly, "Will you come back to the house today? Marcus wants to talk to you." I tensed immediately. "I don't think that's a good idea right now." "He was up all night too," she said. "I think he has some things he needs to say to you." Reluctantly, I agreed to follow them back to the house, though I made it clear I wouldn't be staying long. Marcus was waiting in the living room when we arrived. He stood as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk privately?" he asked, gesturing toward Dad's study. I nodded and followed him, bracing myself for another confrontation. Once inside, with the door closed, he turned to face me. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," he began, his tone carefully controlled. "About me taking credit for supporting Mom and Dad while you were the one actually doing it." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I didn't know about the mortgage payments," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I had no idea." "I believe you," I replied. "Mom and Dad only found out 3 years ago, and they didn't tell anyone." He nodded, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Here's the thing, Stuart. I've always seen myself as the responsible one, the one who stepped up for the family. Finding out that you've been quietly doing more than all of us combined, it's been difficult to process." "I can imagine," I said dryly. He shot me a look but continued. "What I said at dinner was inexcusable. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Not just for what I said, but for years of not seeing you. For buying into this narrative that you were the one who didn't care about family." His apology surprised me with its directness. "Thank you for saying that." "I don't expect one conversation to fix things between us," Marcus added. "But I want you to know that I respect what you did, even if I don't understand why you did it in secret. And I'm going to help Mom and Dad figure out their finances going forward." We talked for another 20 minutes, not solving all our issues, but at least establishing a new foundation of honesty. As our conversation wound down, Marcus asked, "Are you heading back to Chicago today?" "Tomorrow," I replied. "I have a few things to take care of here first." One of those things was meeting with Elaine, who had texted asking to see me alone. We met at a park where her twins could play on the playground while we talked on a nearby bench. Unlike Marcus's measured approach, Elaine was immediately emotional. "I feel terrible, Stuart. All these years I've been so focused on my own life that I never stopped to think about yours. And last night, the things I said, I'm so ashamed." Her remorse seemed genuine, and I found it easier to accept her apology than Marcus's. Perhaps because her slights had always seemed born of obliviousness rather than direct competition. "I forgive you, Elaine," I said simply. "We all played our assigned family roles for so long that it became hard to see beyond them." She nodded, wiping away tears. "I want to know you better, Stuart. The real you, not just my distant brother who shows up for holidays. Will you give me that chance?" I'd like that, I admitted, surprised to find I meant it. When I returned to Chicago the following day, I scheduled an appointment with Harold, my financial advisor. He listened attentively as I explained what had happened, and my decision to stop the mortgage payments after a 3-month transition period. "I have to say I'm proud of you, Stuart," Harold said when I finished. "Setting boundaries is hard, especially with family. Now let's talk about reallocating those funds. You'll have an additional $8,000 monthly to invest or use for your own goals." We spent an hour adjusting my financial plan. Some of the money would go toward increased retirement savings, some toward a down payment fund for my own home, and some would simply allow me to live more comfortably after years of sacrifice. Later that week, I met with Mr. Peterson, my boss, and explained that I would no longer need to work the excessive overtime hours I'd been putting in for years. "I was wondering when you'd finally ease up," he commented. "You've been burning the candle at both ends since you started here. Whatever's changed, I'm glad. We value your work, Stuart, but not at the expense of your well-being." Ryan predictably was delighted by the developments. "So you're telling me I'll actually get to see you on weekends now? Maybe even take that trip to Montreal we've been talking about for 3 years." It's possible, I admitted with a smile. I'm still figuring out what my life looks like without this financial obligation. Over the next few months, my relationship with my family underwent a transformation. My parents called weekly with updates on their downsizing plans. They had decided to sell the house and purchase a smaller single-level home that would be more suitable for their retirement years. They consulted me on financial decisions and, more importantly, showed genuine interest in my life and career. Marcus and I established a cautious new rapport based on mutual respect rather than competition. We would never be best friends, but the antagonism that had characterized our relationship for decades began to fade. Elaine followed through on her promise to get to know me better. She arranged video calls where her twins could chat with their Uncle Stuart, and she made plans to visit Chicago in the spring. When I made the final mortgage payment 3 months later, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't fully acknowledged was there. That evening, I received a card in the mail signed by both my parents. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Stuart, this is to acknowledge the final mortgage payment you've made on our behalf. We cannot adequately express our gratitude for your 8 years of selfless support. More importantly, we want to thank you for having the courage to break the unhealthy patterns in our family. We are better parents and better people for having faced these difficult truths. With love and appreciation, Mom and Dad. I placed the card on my mantle, a small but significant marker of change. 6 months after the Thanksgiving revelation, my life had transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. The most obvious change was financial, with an extra $8,000 each month. I had purchased a comfortable condo in a neighborhood I had previously only dreamed of affording. But the more profound changes were in my relationships and my sense of self-worth. My parents had successfully downsized to a charming 2-bedroom ranch-style home about 15 minutes from their old house. The sale of their larger home had left them with enough equity to purchase the new place outright, eliminating their mortgage entirely. They seemed lighter, somehow unburdened, by the financial strain and the secret they had carried. Our phone calls now included genuine exchanges with them, asking thoughtful questions about my work and life. Dad had even started reading financial journals so he could understand my career better. I want to know what my son does, he explained, simply when I expressed surprise at his new interest. Perhaps the most unexpected development was the shift in my relationship with Marcus. The initial weeks after Thanksgiving had been tense with minimal communication. But gradually a new dynamic emerged. It began with a professional question he called seeking investment advice for one of his clients. The conversation was strictly business, but it represented an acknowledgement of my expertise that had never existed before. From there, we established a tentative new connection. We weren't close, but there was a grudging respect that replaced the dismissive attitude he had always shown toward me. During a family video call in April, he even asked about my recent promotion in front of everyone, giving me space to share my accomplishment without immediately redirecting attention to himself. That's impressive work, Stuart, he had said, and though the words were simple, they represented a seismic shift in our dynamic. Elaine had been true to her word about wanting to know me better. She and her family had visited Chicago in March, staying in a hotel downtown but spending most of their time at my new condo. Her twins, Matthew and Lily, were fascinated by the view from my 23rd floor balcony and delighted in their first experience riding the L train around the city. Watching Elaine interact with her children with patience and attentiveness helped me understand that she had grown into a person quite different from the self-absorbed sister I had known growing up. One evening during their visit, after the children had gone to sleep at the hotel with Greg, watching them, Elaine and I shared a bottle of wine on my balcony. I keep thinking about all the years we missed, she said, gazing out at the city lights. All the times I could have called just to check in but didn't because I was wrapped up in my own life. We all played our parts, I replied. I could have made more effort too. She shook her head. But you were the one who was actually supporting everyone while getting nothing in return. I can't imagine how that felt year after year. I considered her question seriously. At first it felt purposeful, like I was doing something meaningful, even if no one knew. Later it became a habit then, a burden. By the end it was a chain I had forged myself, link by link, keeping me connected to a family dynamic that wasn't healthy for any of us. And now, she asked. I smiled. Now I'm learning what it means to be part of a family based on mutual respect rather than obligation or old patterns. It's new territory for all of us. The personal changes extended beyond my family relationships. With my new financial freedom, I developed interests and hobbies that had previously seemed like luxury indulgences. I took sailing lessons on Lake Michigan, joined a photography club, and started taking cooking classes, discovering a talent for French cuisine that surprised me. Through the cooking class, I met Rachel, an architect who approached cooking with the same precision she brought to her building designs. Our relationship developed naturally and unhurriedly. Unlike with Natalie, there was no financial strain forcing me to work constant overtime, no secret draining my emotional resources. 3 months into dating Rachel, I told her about the mortgage payments and the Thanksgiving confrontation. We were preparing dinner in my kitchen, and I found myself sharing the story without the sense of hurt that had always accompanied it before. "That's quite a burden to have carried alone," she said when I finished, "but also an incredibly generous thing to have done." Looking back, I can see it was both. I acknowledged. Generosity and martyrdom are sometimes separated by a very thin line. "What line is that?" she asked, slicing vegetables with careful precision. "Self-respect," I answered after a moment's thought. "Generosity with self-respect is beautiful. Without it, it becomes self-destruction." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "And now, do you feel you have that balance?" "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "Some days are better than others." My parents visited Chicago for my 35th birthday in June, their first trip to see where I lived, since I'd moved there 13 years earlier. I showed them around my workplace, introduced them to my colleagues and to Rachel, and gave them a tour of the city I had come to love. Watching my father's genuine interest as Mr. Peterson explained my role in the company, seeing my mother's delight in meeting the friends who had supported me through the years. These were gifts I had never expected to receive. On their last evening in town, Dad proposed a toast at dinner. To my son Stuart, he said, his voice thick with emotion, not just for his professional success, but for his courage in showing us a better way to be a family. "I'm sorry it took us so long to see you, son. I'm grateful we have the chance to make it right," Mom added, "and to second chances. We don't deserve one, but we're thankful for it nonetheless." Their words, unimaginable a year earlier, were a balm to old wounds. In August, an invitation arrived for Thanksgiving, this time at Marcus and Jessica's home. "A fresh start in a new location," the invitation read. I accepted without hesitation. When November arrived, I drove to Boston with Rachel beside me. The journey felt different from all those solitary drives in previous years. I was no longer rehearsing defenses against slights or bracing for disappointment. Instead, I found myself looking forward to seeing my family, a novel sensation. Marcus and Jessica's home was spacious and welcoming. The dining table was arranged differently than my parents' had been, a circular table where no one sat at the head, no one was placed at a distance. I noticed that Marcus had seated me between my parents with Rachel beside Mom. A small gesture, but a meaningful one. Before dinner began, Marcus raised his glass. "Before we eat, I'd like to say something." He looked directly at me. Last Thanksgiving was a turning point for our family, though not in the way any of us would have chosen. "Stuart, you forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we had treated you and taken you for granted. I want to thank you for that honesty, difficult as it was. This family is stronger for it." Murmurs of agreement sounded around the table. Dad placed his hand on my shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "So this year," Marcus continued, "we begin a new tradition. One where we explicitly acknowledge each person's contributions, not just financial but in all ways. And we start by acknowledging that Stuart has been the one holding us together in ways we never knew." I felt a lump in my throat as everyone raised their glasses in my direction. This was the recognition I had once longed for, but now, surprisingly, it wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the genuine connection I felt with each person at the table, the sense that we were finally seeing each other clearly with all our flaws and strengths acknowledged. As I looked around at my family, imperfect but trying as all families are, I realized that the greatest lesson from this journey wasn't about money or recognition. It was about honesty, boundaries, and the courage to disrupt unhealthy patterns even when doing so is painful. For years I had measured my worth by what I provided financially, just as my family had measured it by their narrow definition of contribution. Now we were all learning a more nuanced understanding of value and connection. Later that evening, as Rachel and I walked around Marcus's neighborhood after dinner, she asked what I was thinking. "I'm thinking about bridges," I replied. How sometimes you have to let one collapse completely before you can build a stronger one in its place. She nodded, understanding. And the bridge you have now with your family, it's stronger. It's authentic, I said, after considering her question. And that makes all the difference. I thought about the young man who had begun making those mortgage payments 8 years ago, desperate for approval, willing to sacrifice his own needs for a family that didn't see him. That version of me had needed to break under the weight of resentment before I could rebuild myself into someone stronger, someone with boundaries and self-respect. The mortgage payments had stopped, but something more valuable had taken their place: genuine connection based on truth rather than obligation or performance. Have you ever found yourself giving too much to people who don't appreciate it? What would change in your life if you stopped trying to earn approval and instead asked for the respect you deserve? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes standing up for yourself is the most generous thing you can do, both for yourself and for those who take you for granted. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth isn't measured by what you give, but by who you are.